Hi, and welcome to the MDM 101 training session. Today we'll be speaking in regards to the introduction of Ataccama MDM. For those who don't know me, my name is Daniel Marinovich, and I am the Director of Professional Services for North America. In today's session, we'll be going over a couple different things so that you have an understanding of what MDM actually is. Starting off, we'll introduce you to MDM, understand what it is and how people tend to use it, followed by the different styles of MDM that typical customers have an approach with. And we'll wrap it up with the basics of matching principles so that you can understand how the solution would work end to end. We'll leave some time at the end for some questions and answers in case anybody has something to bring up. Starting off with an introduction to MDM. Now, you may have all heard technical definitions of what MDM actually is, but to simplify it a bit so that everybody here would understand, in short, MDM is when you have data coming from multiple sources all the time. It doesn't matter the frequency that it comes in. The important part here is that you're able to connect a variety of different source systems to a single approach. As a result, we end up having many different data sets, or in cases, other source systems that don't necessarily relate to one another. And this is where we kind of want to introduce some of our own matching rules or cleansing rules to see what we could potentially match together. This also includes having different naming conventions. The goal of MDM is to essentially answer which set is reflective of the information that you're trying to gain by organizing everything in one source and in one truth. The end goal for any MDM solution is to be able to go there, find out all the information about, let's say, a particular customer, instead of you having to dig around and find it across many different places. With that, we're going to talk a little bit here about the Ataccama MDM. So in simple terms, this is where we can essentially start to browse our data. And again, you want to be able to understand how the data came together. This will obviously be followed up by some sort of data cleansing and enrichment. So it's not only important to see the data in a central location, but it's also important that we're able to clean it and enrich it without the need of any third-party interventions. Once we have the ability to cleanse and enrich the data, it's typically followed by the match and merge process. So you will determine what deems a match in your data set. And of course, we have the built-in DQ firewall throughout the entire procedure. This will allow you to not have corrupt or invalid data coming into the system. Lastly, it's very important for us in Ataccama to be able to display all this data in a centralized web application. With this in hand, you're able to use our tool called Ataccama MDA, Master Data Admin, and you're able to browse all the data, how it came to be, what rules were used, and most importantly, how did this golden record come created? And lastly, you're able to see the actual relationships between all the entities. In high level, what would this basically mean is that if you ever wanted to understand what addresses belong to a certain customer, or if your customer has a particular policy in effect, you're able to navigate through the UI without having to understand the back-end relationships. Now, moving on to a very high-level example of a master data view. As you can see on the screen, on the far left-hand side, typically the first step in any MDM solution is connecting many different systems to a single repository. Now, in this case, this repository would be the Ataccama MDM solution. Once we connect there, we would essentially configure the cleansing process. And this is where we start to either map our attributes or cleanse the attributes to our liking. This, of course, would come with an explanation code, some sort of scoring mechanism in place, so that you can see how that data was transformed. Once we get the data into a stage that we are comfortable with, we will essentially move on to the matching process. These matching rules would be defined by you, the users, and determine how the records should be essentially joined together. As a result of these matching rules, you end up with a master record. Now, how we determine which attribute from which system should be part of the record is entirely in our control. That's the beauty of having the customizability with the Ataccama MDM solution. And as a final stage, you have the ability to send this information anywhere externally as you please. As we'll see later on today, there will be some type of MDM deployments where we become the source of truth. And in other cases, we want external systems to be that source of truth. For us, there really is no restriction. So whether you want to send this information to a staging table, such as a database, whether you want to send it directly to, let's say, Salesforce as an integration option, or if you want to send this information through an API for those real-time streaming cases or even near real-time. So now that we have an understanding of what MDM is and how high-level MDM looks like, we're now going to start to understand the different styles of MDM that some customers choose. As you can see on the screen, you're now seeing the 3 most common MDM styles that customers typically choose. This is not to say these are the 3 that we always recommend, but these are the most common use cases that we see day to day. What we're going to do now is we'll take a deeper dive into each one of them so that you have an understanding of when it's a pro versus a con, why you would choose one over the other, and we'll see what that looks like. First up is the consolidation style. Now, from the visual diagram, as you can see, typically how this starts off with is through some sort of connected source systems connecting to an MDM repository that's centrally based. Consolidation will cover all your typical use cases from ingesting the data, mapping it, cleansing it, and then lastly, matching and merging it. The key thing to understand here is that when the data comes into MDM, MDM will do the consolidation for you. This data is not being sent back to the source system and is only maintained within the MDM solution itself. You do have the capability of exporting it to an external system, whether they are CRM systems, APIs, data warehouses, or maybe even a data quality steward wants an extract of this. The key thing to note is that in consolidation, everything comes in, gets completely done in the MDM solution itself, and then it can go outwards, but it will never go back to the source system itself. That's where our second type of style comes into place, which is called coexistence. So similar to the consolidation method, coexistence here allows you to write the data back to the source system. Now, in some cases, there may be approvals or restrictions that you have to work with your IT team. And in some cases, you don't even want to override the source systems. But coexistence is a style that allows you to handle this. Now, of course, when you start dealing with these types of permissions, you need to also be aware of the data governance behind it. You need to make sure that permissioning is put in place, there's a workflow automation protocol, and everything is looked at. Because at the end of the day, if you send data back, it's typically going to upsert the data or update it, and this can affect your source system. Now, as a last style of MDM, we come across the centralized, or also known as the transactional MDM. This is typically the end state for most MDM projects. The goal here is that you do a one-time initial load to the MDM system with all your data from your organization. And going forward, the goal is that the data gets maintained in the MDM system. The difference here is that this MDM system is defined as the source of truth for all your applications going forward. We still will feed the external data to your targets. You will still be able to publish it to your favorite reporting tools and so forth. But MDM is where you would go to essentially make the changes to the data, if any. Typically, we see many customers plug in like a messaging queue system here as well. And that's where you can essentially have that end-to-end dream solution. So now that we've talked about the different styles of MDM, we need to start to understand how does MDM actually operate. Now, in these terms, this is where we start to discuss about Ataccama's MDM layers. So, starting off with the database layer, we need to understand how the data flows through the actual solution and what does that mean for MDM exactly. For us at Ataccama, we connect through the connected system. And as a first stage, we always make a copy of the data in what we call the source layer. The source layer, as it is in the name, is making an exact copy of the data coming in so that you have full visibility and the full auditing capability from the moment it touches MDM. Now, once we receive the data, we go through the next layer, which is called the cleansing or the cleansed layer. In this layer, you'll essentially define some data quality rules. Maybe you want to clean a person's full name. Maybe you want to correct the address information. Maybe there's a typo in the person's email address. The type of data quality rules that you can implement are really in your control. The good thing is that we at Ataccama provide you out of the box cleansing rules that you can use to jumpstart your solution. Once we clean the data, another copy of the data is actually stored in the cleanse layer. Now, why we do this is that you have the full lineage of what happened to the data from the moment it came in to the moment it got mastered. So at any point, if you want to go back and question, hey, how did we fix this data from this Oracle system? You have that full lineage available for you. Once the data is in a cleansed state that we're sufficient with, we move on to the matched layer. As discussed earlier, this is where you create your matching rules or matching logic. Are you going to be interested in actually matching exactly one-to-one? Do you want to include something known as fuzzy logic? Again, how you design the matching rules is entirely up to you. We have many different functions for this at this point as well. You could do functions that are allowing typos. Maybe you want to do functions that sound the same, Or maybe you truly want to match one-to-one, for example, like social insurance number. Or for the Americans in the stage here, the social security number. Once the rules get matched, we essentially go through the aggregation. Now, if you want to create some custom reporting or custom metrics, or you want to create the aggregation of which rules you used and which rules you didn't use, this is the layer where you can basically customize this. Now, this layer is optional. You don't have to have it, but for those cases where you will be sending these reports externally, it could be very useful to have. Now, what we just went through is also known as the instance layer. The instance layer is essentially strictly tied to your source system data. Once we move up to the master layer, this is where you can really have a logical model customized to how you want the end result to look and feel for your data stewards. In the master layer, this is also what will be displayed to the end user in the front-end application. With that being said, you do have the ability to create online validation rules and online enrichment rules. So if you ever decide to give the ability to the data stewards to make changes on the fly, you can at least enforce it by your existing rules. And this is where the DQ firewall piece comes into play. You can ensure that they are following the standards that you've built so that nothing gets through the actual system. Lastly, the important part here is that for the MDM solution that we have, you have many different approaches to how the data gets out. Whether this is a batch export through a flat file on some weekly, daily frequency, whether you want to push this through an event handler or publisher like Kafka or AWS SQS, or if you just want to go through your typical core service and just extract it directly to some API mechanism. All these options are available out of the box with the MDM solution. This is not something that you have to custom build to make it work. Now, the next step that we're going to be discussing here is around the development procedure. So we understand what MDM is. We have an idea of how the layers look like, and now we also know the different styles that we have an option to select from. The next step to understand is how do we actually get started and start doing some development work. Now, in Ataccama, we start off by essentially the instance model. We do provide an out-of-the-box model for a variety of different domains, and you can more than likely take it as a starting ground, and in some cases, use it as the actual project for yourselves. In the instance model, all we're really doing is we're creating a model with some entities and columns and relationships that meet the standard for our source system or our internal use case. Once you have defined the instance model, we essentially start to move into the next stage, which is mapping your source systems to this instance model. Now, the nice thing here is that it is not a one-to-one mapping. You can make it like that, but in most cases, it's not something that's realistic. So what you will essentially be doing here is you'll be doing a simple ETL mapping exercise from your source system attributes to the instance model attributes. Once everything is mapped out, every single system will be going through the same cleansing layer procedures. So as described above, this is where you create your data quality rules, the actual cleansing that's going to take place. Once the cleansing is in the happy spot, we essentially feed that cleansed data into the matching layer. In this matching layer, like we said before earlier, you will ultimately decide the types of matching rules that you want to enable or configure for your organization. They, again, are out of the box matching rules that we provide. You're more than happy to take it and adjust it to your liking, or you can start from your own ground, essentially. Once the matching layer is configured, we essentially go into the master model. This is typically where you will spend some time adjusting to please the business or end users. You will see how the data gets displayed. You'll want to make changes. You'll want to add permissions. You might even want to hide some attributes from certain groups or individuals. The master layer is where you're able to do this. Lastly, you have the merge layer. This is the last part of the MDM project. Here, you'll essentially decide how the data gets joined together and how you want to get it ready to be sent to the external systems. This can be a very easy ETL type of job, but it can also be quite complex depending on what your external system is expecting. Typically, this is a one-time exercise or a one-time setup, mainly because your systems are not changing their structure day to day or quarter to quarter. So typically, it's a straightforward exercise once you have the requirements gathered. And lastly, is enjoying the MDA application itself. So instead of having to go and navigate through Excel files and CSVs, you're now able to see all of this in the front-end application. So quick highlight or quick touch point here. In terms of the MDM style reviews, we went over consolidation. As a friendly reminder, all the data goes into MDM, but nothing goes back to the source systems. Coexistence allows you to bring all the data into MDM, and you have the ability to send back the data to the sources. And transactional or centralized MDM, once everything comes to MDM, MDM is the only place you go to edit and maintain the data. From the layer perspective, we highlighted the source layer. Essentially, we make a one-to-one copy of the data. The cleanse layer, you create and validate your data quality rules. The match layer, you're going to be deciding either to go with exact or fuzzy logic. The aggregated layer, if you want to have additional reports or metrics going to your favorite reporting or BI tools. And lastly, the master layer for when we design or create that golden record that you see as an end result. Now, to the last topic of this presentation, we'll be discussing the matching principles. So, how do we actually create these matching rules, or how do they become to be? Essentially, we have three different levels that we deal with. The first level is what we call as partitions. The entire purpose of these partitions is to separate them into small groups with large number of records in them. The second stage, after having these partition groups, is to have the key rules. Now, it's the opposite of the partitions. We want to have as many groups as possible with as little number of members within them. And lastly, we have the matching rules, where we design the expressions. We make sure that they are actually matching to something to create that golden record. And if not, they basically become their own golden record as its own. Now that we know high level the three different matching step principles, we'll take a little bit of a deeper dive here. First up is the partitions. Now, partitions are the main group breaker for any records coming into your MDM system. When they get separated, these attributes or these records will essentially never be matched against one another. A prime example of this is a customer MDM solution where our party data will be coming in both formats of a person and an organization. Typically, you'll have some sort of flag or attribute that indicates which one it actually is. So in this case, you may have a different set of key rules and matching rules applied to a person versus being applied to an organization. What's important to note is that these records are put in partitions sequentially. What that essentially means is that when the data comes in, it will check if it's indeed a person. If it's not, it'll be moved on to the organization group. This essentially happens until every single record belongs to a group. And if you have any logic that doesn't support either one of these partitions, then it essentially becomes a standalone golden record, and Ataccama will assign it a master ID that's automatically generated. Once we have all the records in their own partitions, we move on to the next pairing, which is the key rules. Now, the key rules is where you further define the groupings that you will have. An example of this could be on the person. We want to verify that certain pieces of information is not missing. So we could say, I want to group all my data, assuming that first name, last name, address, and all their contact information is there or present. You may want to have different combinations where you say, okay, maybe I don't have the full address, but I can work with a first line and a postal code. You essentially define these different key rule groupings. Similar concept to the partition, it will go from top to bottom until it fits in some key rule group. If it doesn't, this basically means that that particular record belongs to a partition, however, was not able to be matched based on your key rule groupings. One thing to note, this is also where you need to start defining the importance or the order of importance rather. In our solution, you need to define the rules from strongest to weakest, and you need to make sure that the order is in that correct placement. Lastly, we need to define our actual matching rules. The matching rules typically are broken down by exact or fuzzy matching. For the exact matching, it's what the name entails. You are looking to create some logic that compares these records one to one. So if I have a record coming in with a particular social security number, a second record may be the exact same social security number. These types of rules, typically you do not want to allow any sort of mistakes. And in this particular case, a social security number could be a primary key. Even by making a single typo or a single adjustment to a social security number, it could be a totally different person. So there will be some attributes where you do, and there will be some attributes where you do not want to have an exact match on. For other cases, when you do want something to be a little bit more fuzzy or a little bit more loose, you will create a fuzzy matching rule. In these, you typically accept a typo, a synonym, similar spelling, and so forth. The options really are endless in terms of what you want as a fuzzy match. A pretty popular example is the name Stephen that can be spelled with a V, or Stephen that can be spelled with PH, PHA, PHE, and so forth. In the MDM world, you can use a fuzzy matching rule called SoundX. SoundX is something that's known worldwide and not specifically tied to this in particular tool. And all it does is it looks up a major lookup file or a major dictionary on the side and compares if these two records anyhow exist to one another. So it could return that these two spellings of Stephen are indeed the same person. Now, of course, when you create this fuzzy matching logic, you're not simply tying it to a single attribute. You may have fuzzy matching on the first name, but you might have 5 other exact matches on other attributes. Similarly, for the second example, you might have the name Daniel and you might have it with a typo LE. Now, there's many different functions out there that will determine how many typos do you accept, but each one of them have their own formula behind the scene. Some of them might consider this a change of one because all they have to do is change the L and the E position. And other functions may treat this as 2 or more changes, where they just say, character field 5 is incorrect and character field 6 is incorrect. When you do encounter situations like this, you want to create some sort of threshold. So you want to say, as long as it's 60% not a typo, I will accept it. In other cases, people may want to go up to 80%. The beautiful part here is that you can configure the logic based on a larger formula. What do I mean by that? You can essentially say that if my incoming record has 6 characters in length, I want to allow up to 1 typo. If I have my data coming in with 8 or 10 characters of length, I want to allow up to 2 typos. So you can really customize how you want your fuzzy matching rule to work, and you can apply additional expressions on top of this. So you are not restricted to just that one piece. Now, to put this into a visualization, on the screen, you can see that we have 2 big blue circles, and you can imagine these as being the partitions themselves. In the top, we have party for P, and at the bottom, we have organization or company indicated by C. So you can see that immediately the 2 groups get separated from the beginning. From there, we have the key groups that will be looking at the social security number indicated by the red or pink circle. And then we have the groupings for the full name based on the orange circle. So what we can do is we can say our one key rule is that the social security number and full name cannot be empty, and they must be similar or they must be the same. So on the left-hand side, where we have 4 John Smiths, you can see the first pink circle is together because the social security number and the full name are the same. The second pair of John Smith have the same social security number, but different from the first pair. This is why we have a second grouping there. And the last two don't have any social security number, but they all share the same full name. Now, in our solution, visually, you can see that these are two different key groups, but you can make multiple key groups as your key rule. This is where you can now define your matching rules or matching logic. You may determine that as long as the full name is the same, put them together. You might take it further and say that uh, as long as the full name and one typo in the social security number is the same, we're okay. Or you can create a rule that says, let's remove the leading zeros and any non numeric value, and then let's do the matching rules. That's how essentially these matching step principles work. You have a partition, you bring them in key groups, and then you apply your matching rules. Hopefully, this session helped you understand MDM a little bit more, and you are now familiar with the basics of MDM 101. And if you like, we have other sessions for MDM to further your knowledge. And lastly, thank you for attending and enjoy the rest of the summit.